and it's clear that everybody's following what we're saying. So we'll move on to the next part of the presentation. So I'd like to take this idea of vulnerability a bit deeper. How does the brain react to being vulnerable? What happens when the brain notices that we are vulnerable? So I'd like to turn your attention to this lady in blue with the red gloves. Let's imagine that she punches me in the face. What happens? How does the brain relate to that experience of being punched in the face? So the first thing that happens is our senses record this experience. So my eyes see her gloves coming towards my face. My ears may hear the sound of the punch, and my body may feel the impact of the punch, and I might even smell any perfume she's wearing. So in the first instance, these are just pure signals to the brain, meaningless signals. They don't mean anything. How does the brain start to make meaning from these signals? So a part of our brain that we rely on to make meaning from these kind of signals is called the hippocampus. I've purposely used the picture of a hippopotamus to make it easier to remember this word. This is the hippocampus in the brain, this blue object in the brain. And the job of the hippocampus is to combine information from our five senses and create meaning from that information and store it in our long-term memory. And the way it actually makes meaning is to look into our long-term memory and see if there's any relevant information to the new data that has just been gotten from the five senses, and try and make meaning from there. As soon as it is able to make a meaning out of those meaningless data, it then stores that meaning in a long-term memory for retrieval whenever it is needed. One of the important things about the hippocampus is that, just think about this for a second. If you want to try to remember something, what do you do, James?
Well, it always reminds me of when I was at school and I had to learn the times tables, because I used to like learning things quite visually. But the times tables, there's nothing really, you can't multiply things. So essentially I had to learn it by rote. So I was just repeating all the times tables in my head, and I kept going over and over and over until I remembered them. Yeah,
and the idea of the times tables is quite a good example, because when we are repeating the times tables over and over in our brain, what we are really doing is repeating that, sending that data through our hippocampus over and over again, and this is how it gets stored in a long-term memory. So if you want anything to get into your long-term memory, all you have to do is to focus on that thing for a long period of time, just like James is talking about repeating this multiple times table over and over again. So the more you focus on something, the more you repeat it over and over again, the more you think through anything over and over again, the more of a chance it has to get stored in our long-term memory. And why is this important? If you think about worrying, what is it? What does worry entail? Worry really is a repetition of information that spells out that we are vulnerable. If you think about the last time you were worried, you will notice that what you were thinking of was about something that was about to go wrong, or something that could go wrong in the future. What would you say about worry, James?
Exactly that, and just the sort of stuff I was saying before about worry. The start of anxiety is you know, those big three sometimes things is, you know, if something goes wrong, it's going to go dreadfully wrong. If it's gonna go wrong, it's most likely it will go wrong, and I won't be able to cope with it when it does go wrong. So there's those sorts of things that are really common that we see.
Yeah.
And so when we try and plan for all of those things, we try and think, what can I do if it does happen? What will it mean? And how can I manage that? So all of that, that's worry. They're planning and preparing for these anxiety-based thoughts that we get.
Right. So so what we're saying here then is that when we do that, when we have that planning and worry, what we're really doing is passing that information that we are vulnerable through our hippocampus over and over again. Hence, in our long-term memory, it becomes easily accessible, the idea that we are vulnerable. So if you think about the story we started with this lady who punched me in the face. Now that I've had that experience, let's just kind of move on a bit. Now that I've had that experience with her punching me in the face, and my hippocampus has stored that experience in my long-term memory, what do you think will happen when I see her again in the future, James?
You're not going to want to get punched in the face, that's for sure.
Excuse me. Yeah, because as soon as I see her, my senses pick her up. I have an instant memory of that experience. And this is something that people may not necessarily cue well into. They notice that they feel anxious. They don't know why, but there's actually been a trigger in an experience that triggered that sense of anxiety. It may be a smell, something as simple as a smell. It may be something as simple as a sound that they hear. All of a sudden, they start feeling anxious. They don't really know why. Or it may be that they just suddenly entered a street where maybe something negative happened to them once. They suddenly find themselves feeling anxious, and just nothing has happened. Why am I feeling so anxious? Our brain stores long-term information on experiences that make us feel vulnerable. And once it sees anything that it can relate to that, it naturally starts to instigate a sense of anxiety. Did you have anything to add to that, James?
Absolutely. It's just being so aware of here and now anxiety, I think, is that real key here. Because like we say, I might be feeling anxious for a whole week in different sort of stages and phases, but what I need to key into sometimes is if I'm getting on that bus, or if I'm waiting for that person to arrive, or whatever it is, it's knowing what's reminding me in that moment of vulnerability and working with that. That's the sort of way to start chipping away at these things.
Okay, right. So as soon as our mind notices that we are vulnerable, it's sends a signal, a threat signal, to another part of our brain that deals with that sense of threat. And this other part of our brain is something people may have come across already. It's called the amygdala. I've used this image of a soldier to depict the amygdala, because the amygdala is almost like the part of our brain that protects us. Is the soldier that keeps us away from safe from threats, anything that might threaten us or cause us harm. The amygdala is out to protect us all the time. This is the amygdala in the brain. This two red bulbs, and if you notice this other organ, this is the hippocampus. You'll notice that they are just right next to each other, and this makes sense because they are communicating a very important information that keeps us safe and makes us live a fruitful life. And so the amygdala, as I said, is the emotional center of the brain. It's the protector, the protection center of the brain. And it's responsible for instigating the production of stress hormones that infuse the body with energy to deal with threats. One of the interesting things about the amygdala is that it also receives information from our five senses, quite in a similar way to what the hippocampus does. But the hippocampus gets that information from our short-term memory, which is also called the working brain. But the amygdala gets that information through the thalamus from our five senses, because when we see threats, we need to be able to respond immediately. Just think about it, James, for a second. If you see a lion coming, would you like to need to spend a lot of time thinking,
no,
what should I do about what should I do about this? You're already eating up before you can think.
I would have ran, because essentially my body would have prepared itself to, because the amygdala's there, and that's why.
Yeah. So the amygdala responds to the senses also, but before it responds, it checks with our hippocampus to see if there's any danger. So the amygdala sees senses the threat from. No, I should say this first. Anything that the amygdala senses, it assumes is a threat. So anything it senses at all, it assumes that is a threat. So before it responds, it has to check with our hippocampus. It's almost like it's asking our hippocampus, is this a threat? And hippocampus, being the one connected to the long-term memory, checks with the long-term memory, thinking, I know I'm kind of personifying these elements in our brain because it helps me to think clearly about them. So our hippocampus checks our long-term memory. Is there any threat to this new event? And if it finds a threat there, it sends a threat signals back to the amygdala, and then the amygdala responds by inducing the body, making the body induce stress hormones for that very familiar flight or fight symptoms. James, you had something to say about that?
Yeah, that's right. Well, really, it's a question to everyone. So it's really just asking, how do you recognize fight or flight? What is it that's about fight or flight for you?
Okay, sorry, before anybody answers that question, I would like to use this as an opportunity to say the first person who gets that question right, I have an offer, something I want to give to that person, a gift I'd like to give to that person. I'll just see the first person who gets that question right. I won't mention what the gift is until we've gotten a few answers. Sorry, James, carry on.
That's absolutely fine. So really, it's whatever sensations you feel when you think you might be having the fight or flight response. So there could be a threat around, it could not be a threat around, but we could definitely be believing there is. It's whatever's happening. It's just pop it down and say, that's what I think the fight or flight is when I experience it.
Okay. So, James, can you just repeat your question in maybe a bit shorter? Sorry.
Yeah. Yep. How do you notice the fight or flight response?
Okay. Okay, so the fight or flight is a response to danger. How do you notice it in your body? Fluttering in my chest. Okay, so Anita has answered fluttering in my chest. What would you say to that, James?
I'd say, yeah, that's right. That's something you can feel. Other answers we could have is shaking. If anyone shakes, I can sometimes feel shaky. Breathlessness, if I feel. Yeah, that's right. We've got pounding heart.
Pounding heart. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, since Anita got the question right first, so Anita, you get the gift, and I'll just tell you what the gift is. I'm going to be giving you 6 free CBT sessions. Hopefully you're going to find that useful. I'm sure this is probably worth more than £300 on its own. And in addition to that, I'm going to be giving you the Stress Therapist's Anxiety e-course. So if you got 6 free CBT sessions with myself and our anxiety course, right? So maybe at this point, I'll just say we'll move on to the next part of this seminar. James, do you have any other questions to ask, or should we just move on?
Well, I think we'll just move on. I think just to know that there can be genuinely dangerous situations, and we would probably notice the danger first and then afterwards notice all these. I think that's another important thing.
Okay. Right, so moving on then. I'll just do a quick reflection of what we've already looked at. So the idea is we experience vulnerability, and vulnerability makes us feel anxious. And the way this happens is that our hippocampus logs data in our long-term memory, which is like evidence of our vulnerability, evidence of things that make us vulnerable. And anytime those memories of vulnerability gets triggered, our amygdala gets activated and then is made to respond by inducing stress hormones, which then make us experience all these symptoms of anxiety, like fluttering of the chest, pounding of the heart, but not in my stomach, as Anita mentioned. Right. So the next part of the course, the next part of the presentation, will be looking at different forms of anxiety problems and how these relate to what we've discussed so far. So if anybody is watching this presentation after we have presented it live on air, all you just have to do to watch the remaining part of this presentation is to just put in your email and your name in the form that will be below this presentation. Then you can get free access to the remaining part of the presentation. Right, so moving on.